Another open letter to Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission and the members of the European Parliament. 1st November 2025, Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission and the members of the European Parliament. I am writing directly to you as a parent, as Archanes, people, not as a diplomat. I am a direct descendant of the Arche Sultanate, a nation that once stood sovereign and proud. Our kingdom was built on justice, faith, and courage. That kingdom was invaded, its people slaughtered, and its children destroyed while Europe, which speaks endlessly of human rights, stood by and watched. Do you have children? What if this happened to them? Imagine a group of soldiers bursting into your home, pointing guns at your face, ordering you to stand still. Then 5 to 10 of them take turns raping your children in front of your eyes while you can do nothing, their guns pointed at your face. Imagine watching as they take your child's dignity and life, the one you raised and loved, and you can do nothing. That was not a single tragedy. It happened to thousands of Archanes mothers, fathers, and brothers. That is what the Archanes people were forced to live through. This is not history, it is memory carved into our bones. Imagine they take your daughter at night and bring her to their camp. You go there every day, screaming, but all you get is their laughter as they point guns at your face and order you to leave. Day and night you cannot sleep because you know your girl is suffering. After 3 to 5 days, they bring out your daughter and call everyone in the village. They pour petrol on her and burn her alive. Again, that story is not a single event. You live in poverty. They have already taken your land and slaughtered your animals. You have nothing left. What you have is suffering. Every day and night you see them still walking freely in front of your small house, but you cannot do anything. This did not happen to only a few Archanes people. It happened to many of us. Those are only 3 real event tragedy I mentions to you here. There are many worse than that happen to our children beyond your imagination. Many of our children tortured, burned alive, raped to death, sex slave. They force them naked every day in camp when they take turn raping him. Read reports Amnesty International, our books in Amazon, Human Rights Watch reports and many written evidences that available in front of your eyes. That no one dare to deny it. In short, I try to summarize it, but please look deeper. This only with limited knowledge I managed to gather. The actual tragedies and atrocities are more than these. Children, over 50,000 children killed, around 20,000 raped to death, documented cases. Since 1952, not including those killed from 1945, deaths, more than 150,000 lives lost since 1952, excluding thousands of enforced disappearances. Women, over 30,000 victims of sexual violence and systematic rape. Houses, approximately 70,000 homes burned across 23 districts. Land, over 5 million hectares seized for military and corporate interests, driving millions into structural poverty. Mass graves, at least 1,200 sites identified across Arche. Oil and gas, more than $2 billion United States dollars per year extracted and lost from the Aran block and other fields. Gold and minerals, more than $500 million United States dollars per year stolen from Arche Besar, Nagan Raya, and Padi. Other resources, forests, seas, and farmlands destroyed, an estimated 50 trillion Indonesian rupiahs, 3.5 billion United States dollars per year, in ecological and economic loss. These figures are not just statistics, they represent the suffering, pain, and loss endured by generations of Archanes. Every number hides a story of a mother, a father, a child, a village, all of whom deserve remembrance and justice, either through military operations, forced displacement, or deliberate starvation and neglect. The scars of these atrocities remain carved into the hearts of those who survived. I have held my children, and when I do, I remember the Archanes children who never came home, the boys who were beaten to death in Loksukon, the girls whose cries still echo across the ruins of our land. Parents were forced to watch while their children were brutalized and killed. The world called it security. The corporations called it protection. But it was murder, and it was done for profit. You speak of justice, of freedom, of moral duty. What about Arche? What about our children? What about our mothers who lost everything? You trade with those who destroyed us and call it diplomacy. You protect companies that profited from our blood and call it progress. Miss Ursula and members of Parliament. If you have children, look at him tonight. Ask yourself, what would you do if this happened to them? Would you still stay silent? Would you still defend those who killed for oil and money? I am not begging, I am demanding. Recognize what happened to Arche. Acknowledge the crimes. Open an international investigation. Stop protecting governments and corporations that used our suffering to fill their pockets. Justice delayed is justice denied. Let me tell you about Indonesia. Indonesia is not a country. It is a colonial legacy built on the blood and land of others. Below is the proof of Indonesia is colonist legacy and it is not a legit country. Check below and search the facts that what I am telling you are all true and they are not fabrications. 1. Name, colonial creation. The name Indonesia was coined by British ethnologist George Windsor Earle in 1850 and popularised by Scottish scholar James Richardson Logan. Both were European academics describing the islands as a colonial geographic zone, not a nation. Indigenous peoples never used this name before colonial classification. 2. Territory, colonial borders and agreements. The territorial framework of what is now Indonesia was not designed by its people but by European colonial powers. Between 1824 and 1891, a series of agreements between Britain and the Netherlands, including the Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1824 and later boundary adjustments, divided Southeast Asia into spheres of colonial control. The Dutch consolidated their claim over the East Indies while Britain retained the Malay Peninsula and parts of Borneo. These colonial negotiations erased the sovereignty of existing kingdoms such as Aceh, Maluku, and others by merging them into one administrative colony under the Dutch East Indies. When Indonesia declared independence in 1945-1949, it simply inherited and continued those colonial boundaries, rather than creating a nation based on the consent of its peoples. 3. Laws, police, and military institutions, colonial continuation. Indonesia continues to use Dutch colonial laws and institutions that were designed for control, not justice. These include the Wetboek van Strafrecht voor Nederlandisch Indië, translated into Kitab Undang-Undang Hukum Pidana, KUHP, Dutch Criminal Code, Burgerlijk Wetboek voor Nederlandisch Indië, translated into Kitab Undang-Undang Hukum Perdata, KUH Perdata, Civil Code, and the Agrarische Wet 1870, Dutch Agrarian Law of 1870, which established colonial property ownership and exploitation systems. The Dutch also created the Nederlandisch Indische Politie, Colonial Police Service, and the Koninklijk Nederlandisch Indisch Leger, KNIL, Royal Netherlands East Indies Army, both of which became POLRI, Indonesian National Police, and TNI, Indonesian Armed Forces, after independence. These colonial codes and institutions continued in use, masih dipakai, long after 1945. Many provisions remain active today in courts, administration, and military doctrine, demonstrating a direct continuity of colonial law and governance. 4. Sumpah Pemuda, historical fabrication. The so-called 1928 Youth Pledge is an anachronism. It declared unity under a country that did not yet exist. Indonesia only proclaimed independence in 1945. In 1928, Java and Sumatra were still fully under Dutch control. The pledge mentioned Bahasa Indonesia, but that language did not yet exist. It referred to Malay. The event was later rewritten as nationalist propaganda. 5. Language, Malay disguised as national. There is no language originally called Bahasa Indonesia. It is a renamed and standardized version of Classical Malay, Riai Johor Malay, adopted to create a political identity and suppress regional languages. The change erased the historical truth that Malay was a lingua franca long before Indonesia's creation. 6. National emblem, borrowed myth. The national emblem, Garuda Pancasila, was adopted in 1950 and is based on the Garuda bird from ancient Hindu mythology. This symbol, originating from India, has no roots in the cultures of Aceh, Papua, or Maluku. It was chosen to imitate Indian emblems and create an illusion of ancient unity that never existed among Indonesia's diverse peoples. 7. Corruption and power, systemic legacy. The Javanese people, once used as forced laborers and slaves under Dutch colonialism, became the dominant political class after faking independence. They inherited and internalized the colonial structures of corruption and hierarchy, turning them into tools of control. Corruption has infected every level of government in Jakarta since independence. Even humanitarian aid after the 2004 Aceh tsunami was misused. Funds intended for victims were stolen or diverted by political and military elites. This systemic corruption reflects the same exploitation and greed embedded in the colonial system. 8. Mass violence, nationwide, across Indonesia, from Aceh and Papua to East Timor, Maluku, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and Riau, the military has carried out massacres, torture, and the destruction of entire villages. These atrocities are justified under the false claim of preserving national unity, when in reality they serve to silence dissent and maintain centralized control. 9. Military, machine of repression. The Indonesian Armed Forces, TNI, were never designed to protect civilians. Born from the colonial KNIL structure, they remain a force of intimidation and fear. Their campaigns across the archipelago left a trail of murdered children. In Aceh alone, more than 59,000 children were killed between 1952 and 2005, in Papua about 59,250, in East Timor over 7,000, in Maluku more than 1,300, in Kalimantan nearly 57,000, and in Sulawesi over 1,000. These figures come from survivor reports and human rights investigations, showing that Indonesia's military repression has targeted even the most innocent. The TNI has committed widespread killings, enforced disappearances, and torture against its own citizens, especially in regions demanding autonomy or independence. 10. Resource exploitation, colonial economics. Indonesia's economy is built on extraction, a direct continuation of the Dutch colonial system. Oil, gas, gold, forests, and palm oil are taken from Aceh, Papua, and Kalimantan, enriching Jakarta's elite and foreign corporations while leaving the local people in poverty. This pattern of exploitation is colonialism in another form. 11. False history, fabricated nationhood. After independence, Indonesia rewrote its history to invent a myth of unity. The narratives glorify Java-centric nationalism and erase the histories of independent nations such as Aceh, Maluku, and Papua. Events like Sumpah Pemuda were distorted to create a false origin story of the republic. The state even claims our heroes and heroines as if they fought for Indonesia. Kut Nyak Dien, Laksamana Malahayati, often written Kamalahayati, and many others are presented in official narratives as national figures serving the republic. These are lies. They did not fight for a colonial construct, they defended Aceh's sovereignty. If they were alive today, they would fight the colonizers and the puppet regimes that legitimize occupation until their last breath. 12. Supersema and G30S, PKI, historical fabrications. The events surrounding the 1965-1966 purge and the so-called Supersema decree are among the greatest deceptions in Southeast Asian history. Millions were murdered under false accusations of communism. The Supersema document, supposedly transferring power to Suharto, exists in multiple versions and has never been verified. It was a political tool created to justify dictatorship and mass murder. Indonesia's existence is not freedom, it is the continuation of colonial rule under a different flag. Let me tell you about Aceh, a sovereign nation before colonization. 1. Recognized an independent kingdom, the Sultanate of Aceh Darussalam was a fully sovereign Islamic kingdom that existed long before Indonesia was created. From the 16th century onward, Aceh was internationally recognized as an independent state. It maintained diplomatic relations with the Ottoman Empire, Britain, the Netherlands, and more than 40 other nations across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. In 1565, the Ottoman Empire formally acknowledged Aceh as an ally, a fact preserved in the Topkapi Palace archives in Istanbul. Aceh's ambassadors served in India, Arabia, and the Ottoman court, representing a state with its own governance, military, and laws. Aceh also signed legally binding trade and peace treaties with Britain, 1819, Portugal, Belgium, and the Netherlands before the Dutch invasion. If Aceh is not recognized as a sovereign kingdom and an independent nation, then by the same logic, Belgium, home country of President Charles Michel, and Germany, home country of President Ursula von der Leyen, could not be recognized as legitimate nations either. The same logic would apply to all other countries, including the United Nations and the European Union, whose legitimacy would stand on the same principle of sovereignty and recognition. 2. Guiding principle. The guiding principles of Aceh's civilization are expressed in the timeless maxim Adit bak potu moiruhom, Hukom bak sia kuala, Ganun bak putro fang, Risam bak laksamana, meaning, custom belongs in the hand of the king, religious laws in the hand of sia kuala, meaning a lama or religious scholar, the Ganun, laws beside religious laws, in the hand of putro fang, meaning Aceh's women, and the customs to the admiral, army. This statement defines Aceh's social and legal harmony, the balance between authority, spirituality, law, and gender. These codes were shaped and upheld by both men and women, especially Aceh's queens and scholars, who ensured that justice and equality guided governance, law, and military ethics. 3. Own law. Aceh have many laws, and Ghanaian main one is the Ghanaian Mukuta Alam codified Aceh's governance structure, integrating Ghanaian Tanah Ulayat, communal land law, Ghanaian Layout, maritime law, Ghanaian Utuan, forest and environmental law, and more than 50 Ghanaians and ethical codes of gender and military honor. All of these laws were authored or approved by Aceh's women leaders, emphasizing the equality and wisdom enshrined in the Sultanate's system of justice. 4. Currency and economy. Aceh maintained its own independent monetary system. The Sultanate minted gold dinars and silver dirhams that were widely used and recognized in international trade across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. This shows that Aceh possessed full economic sovereignty, engaged directly in global commerce, and was never dependent on any foreign colonial economy. 5. Language. The Acehese language is among the oldest and most developed in Southeast Asia. It has its own grammar, phonetics, and written literature distinct from Malay and other regional tongues. For centuries, it served as a medium of education, poetry, diplomacy, and law within the Sultanate. Today, it remains a living language, preserving Aceh's intellectual heritage and resisting linguistic colonization by the so-called Bahasa Indonesia. 6. Culture and arts. Aceh's culture is a reflection of its spiritual depth and intellectual strength. Traditional dances such as Saman, Siadati, and Didong are not mere performances but living expressions of discipline, unity, and faith. Poetry and calligraphy flourished under royal patronage, turning art into a vehicle of education and diplomacy. Aceh's craftsmanship in textiles, architecture, and literature influenced many neighboring regions and remains a symbol of refinement and devotion. 7. Origin of many nations. Aceh was historically a crossroads of civilizations that shaped the cultural and religious identity of the Malay world. From its ports, Islam spread peacefully through trade and scholarship to Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. Aceh's scholars, traders, and missionaries established schools and communities across the region, laying the foundation for the cultural unity of Southeast Asian Islam. This legacy makes Aceh not a follower, but a source of civilization. 8. Own territory. The Sultanate of Aceh had clearly defined borders covering the northern part of Sumatra, as recognized in treaties and historical maps by European powers such as the Dutch, British, and Portuguese. These borders were recorded in multiple 17th–19th century European cartographic documents. Aceh's sovereignty was acknowledged in maritime charts and diplomatic records, making its territory one of the most precisely documented in Southeast Asia. 9. Natural resources. Aceh is endowed with abundant natural wealth, oil, gas, gold, forests, and fertile land, that have sustained its people for centuries. During the colonial and post-colonial periods, these resources were systematically looted by foreign powers and Indonesian elites. The Aran gas fields alone generated billions of dollars in profit for multinational corporations such as ExxonMobil, while the people of Aceh remained impoverished. This exploitation mirrors the same colonial structure that robs the land and leaves its rightful owners in suffering. 10. People, military strength, and the first female admiral. Aceh's navy and army resisted European invasions for decades, notably under Sultan Iskandar Muda. The world's first female admiral, Laksamana Malahayati, commanded Aceh's navy in the late 16th century, leading thousands of troops and defeating Portuguese fleets. The Acehnese are resilient, proud, and deeply rooted in their cultural and religious heritage, surviving centuries of occupation and war. 11. Gender balance. Acehnese society has long been founded on gender balance, not as theory but as daily practice. Equality between men and women was embedded in law, leadership, and cultural life centuries before modern concepts of gender rights emerged. Women served as queens, judges, scholars, poets, and military leaders. Their participation in decision-making was both a duty and a right. In Aceh, leadership was measured not by gender but by wisdom, service, and integrity, making the Sultanate one of the earliest examples of a gender-balanced civilization in world history. 12. Education structure. The Sultanate of Aceh established one of the earliest organized education systems in the region, consisting of schools, madrasas, libraries, and royal academies known as daya. These institutions attracted scholars from across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, fostering the exchange of knowledge in science, astronomy, law, theology, and philosophy. Education in Aceh was free and inclusive, providing equal access to both men and women, centuries before modern nations recognized such rights. The legacy of Aceh's intellectual tradition continues to influence Southeast Asian scholarship today. Aceh established schools, madrasas, and centers of Islamic learning that attracted scholars from across Asia and the Middle East, creating a lasting intellectual legacy. Aceh's sovereignty is a documented reality buried under colonial lies. This truth is reinforced by Aceh's historical treaties with global powers such as the Ottoman Empire, Portugal, and Britain, and by the records of Aceh's ambassadors sent to Europe to build peaceful international relations. These facts demonstrate that Aceh was never a colonial territory but an equal participant in global diplomacy. To uphold justice, we call for an international investigation and tribunal under the European Union and United Nations to examine Indonesia's crimes in Aceh, mass killings, systematic rape, forced displacement, and cultural destruction. Such an inquiry must prosecute those responsible and restore Aceh's right to sovereignty. I urge the European Union to recognize Aceh's legal right to self-determination and to investigate Indonesia's continuing crimes of occupation, exploitation, and genocide. Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, Helsinki. The so-called MOU Helsinki undermined Aceh's right to full independence by turning what was fundamentally a decolonization struggle into a domestic autonomy issue. It failed to meet international standards of self-determination and justice, reducing Aceh's sovereignty to administrative control rather than genuine freedom. The agreement, signed in 2005, was nothing more than a political deception built on manipulation and colonial compromise. The text was drafted and approved under pressure, controlled by foreign interests and intelligence operations whose goal was to silence the Aceh's independence movement, not to deliver justice or peace. The MOU Helsinki stands as another betrayal, a continuation of the colonial agenda hidden behind diplomatic language. The MOU has nothing to do with the Aceh's people, nothing to do with the victims, and nothing to do with justice. The same army that raped, tortured, and killed our children still walks freely on Aceh's land, laughing in impunity. These perpetrators live without consequence, protected by the very system that claims to uphold peace. We, the Aceh's, continue to suffer tremendously under this false peace that shields criminals while silencing the voices of the oppressed. If you do not withdraw your agreement and support for this colonial legacy and its agent, colonialist Indonesia, it means you have failed to uphold your most basic human rights principles. By continuing to endorse the structures that oppress us, you align yourselves with tyranny and betray the very foundations of justice and freedom you claim to defend. If you, who call yourselves leaders of the free and just world, continue to ignore our request for recognition and independence, then what should we call you? How can you speak of democracy and human rights while turning your backs on a nation whose sovereignty was stolen and whose children were silenced by colonial and military power? The measure of justice is not found in words, but in the courage to act. Instead of defending us, you choose to work together with the colonizer. We have watched you shake hands and make deals with those who oppress and kill us. You speak of justice while standing beside those who commit genocide and plunder our land. When you align yourselves with the powerful against the powerless, your silence becomes complicity and your diplomacy becomes betrayal. Madam Ursula von der Leyen and Madam and Mr. Members of Parliaments. Is this what you call being human rights defenders? Answer me, and answer the children of Aceh who are still waiting for justice. Do not speak of human rights if you cannot defend the very people whose lives were destroyed while you watched in silence. We have written to you before. We have sent emails, open letters, and reports filled with evidence, testimonies, and pain. Thousands of international organizations have documented what happened to us. Yet you ignore it all. You read our suffering and turn away. You continue to sit with those who murdered our people and call it diplomacy. Instead of justice, you choose silence. Instead of truth, you choose convenience. Instead of defending us, you work with the colonizers who continue to kill us. After this open letter, if you still ignore us, then we will call you what you truly are, the leaders of hypocrisy and lies. History will remember your silence as the side you chose. The children of Aceh will know who stood for justice and who turned away. We ask not for sympathy, but for truth and recognition. With truth and unbroken faith, Sultan Faris Sire, descendant of the Sultanate Aceh sovereignty and Aceh independent nation. For the people and children of Aceh.